Would you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that you will support the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Michigan, and the Charter Township of Grand Blanc to the best of your ability as a Planning Commission member?
I do.
Thank you. Then you can sign your name there, and I used your middle initial.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else you gentlemen need? Okay.
Thank
Now
you very
we
much.
get this.
Well, good evening. Welcome to the regular Planning Commission meeting, Grand Blanc Township, October 4th, I think it is, 2018. Light turnout this evening. We could all rise and join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Planning Commission members present this evening. We have Mr. Mansour, Ms. Coulter, our newest Planning Commission member, Mr. Saab, Mr. Brown, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Gellings, Mr. Yancho, and Mr. Horsha, and from our Planning Department, Mr. Mark Lloyd. Next item on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Anyone have any changes to the agenda that's been published? Motion is in order to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Motion by Mr. Brown, support by Mr. Yancho. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion passes 8-0. Since Mr. Bandersky is not here, I wonder if we pass on the approval of the September meeting minutes.
You have them, don't
Yeah,
you?
I've gone through, but I don't
Yeah.
know
But you can still adopt them, even though the secretary's not here.
if everyone else have a chance to look through those. I don't know with the emailed agenda, some people were having trouble printing it and didn't see them until
Okay.
this evening. That's the only thing I think it might be wise if we, unless there's any issues with that we postpone that to the next meeting, just make sure everyone's had a chance to look through it.
Great.
Next item on our agenda is an opportunity for public comment. There is no public here this evening, so I guess we'll skip by that one. Correspondence, we do have planning and zoning news. We have a couple other things that are desk or tabletop here. There's a listing that was requested by the Planning Commission regarding appointments and when they're up, and we've got contact information, so this is good. That was presented or prepared by Ms. Kathy Lane, and then we also have the election November 6th. There's kind of a Cliff Notes version of what the proposals that are on the ballot on the back of that.
Planning and zoning.
Yep. Got it. Yeah. You were napping when I said that. We have no old business. New business is discussion of the master plan RFP. Mr.
Well,
Lloyd.
Thank you, sir. I can assure you I won't nap during this. Well, thanks a lot for this opportunity. I know we've been working on thinking about, and a number of you on this commission have been looking at this scope of work and things to do with this master plan for a while. You spent a few months during 2017 year to put your scope together. But of course, we all know that the township has the authority to plan and to prepare a master plan, and that's what we're in the process of doing. The Michigan Planning Enabling Act allows us to do this, and we have a responsibility as well, not only to the state to meet this requirement, but also to the community to put together a plan that's going to do a very, very good job to reflect the interests and the interests of the community. The current master plan that we use is a plan that was adopted in August of 2013. It's basically a supplemental project that was done to mostly incorporate Technology Village, although there was updating information and stuff done, but the primary goal there was really to incorporate that Technology Village into it. Now another goal is going to be to incorporate the DDA, and we have a few other things that have occurred since the last time. So we got other work of that same nature that's going to be required in addition to the basic, redo of the master plan, rewrite. So since that time, as I mentioned, the commission's had several meetings back in 2017 to review the plan. You took the time to review it and you established a scope for that review. After that was completed, you prepared a report, forwarded that to the Township Board in January. And then in March, near the end of March, we put together a joint meeting. And I know not everybody was here, and that's part of why I'm giving you a little bit of background, but in March we did a joint meeting, and at that meeting we got into quite a bit of discussion. We had the firm that we had been using for a long time, our consultant, who had made a proposal. We had staff, we had the commission, and we had the board. We had a very good discussion, I think everybody would agree. There was a lot of enthusiasm. But at the end of the day, what was talked about, or mentioned at least, I don't know how much it was really talked about, what was mentioned, that we really didn't have a budget, even though we went through all of that discussion. And so there was talk about getting one together, and what ended up happening is we went through, a considerable amount of time, and we didn't. And so when it came my responsibility to put together the budget, I did, and I presented some of that information at the last meeting as well, let the commission know that we put together a $40,000 budget for 2019 to help pay for the costs of preparing the rewrite of the master plan. And as a result of that, I put together an RFP and sent that RFP out. So my approach to this, and I hope it's pretty clear, is, when the responsibility came around to put the budget together, I immediately put together an RFP to associate with that so that we could get started at the beginning of the year, because the budget doesn't start until the beginning of the year. But we got about 90 days or so before the beginning of that year, and this process will take 90 days, give or take. So I figured if we want to get started near the beginning of that year, or however we wanted to, at least be prepared, then this would be the time to begin the process of soliciting proposals. And the way that I know, and the success that I've had, is using an RFP. As I mentioned, we did have a proposal. It was at about $80,000, did not include any, I don't believe, any work that the township staff might do, because at the time it was originally prepared, you didn't have a planner. Right at about that time it was transitioning, is that when that happened. But the proposal wasn't reduced in price or scope, and so that proposal stays the way that was. But we think that we can do that for $40,000. Now, most of you probably know what an RFP is, but just quickly to put it all out there, make sure we're on the same page. It's a document that gets put together to solicit proposals. It's often made through a bidding process by an agency or company interested in procurement of a commodity, service, or valuable asset. So that's what we're about to do. Now, there is also a process called an RFQ, and that's what's called a request for qualifications. That would mean that you would prepare the scope very definitively of what you wanted, have somebody tell you and show you how they're qualified to do that work. And then what you do is you'd ask for proposals from those firms that you had already pre-qualified to make proposals to you. So you go through a process of getting people pre-qualified. It's an extra step. It's not necessary. We don't have 400 vendors who are going to, submit to propose on this. I don't think. And then here, let me just back up for a second. So what's in an RFP? So I mentioned that. Now, moving on, I did prepare and I distributed a draft RFP to you guys. And I guess I could mention, and I didn't think, honestly, when that happened, about whether or not you were going to be able to open your emails. I hope you were able to open your emails and get it and take a look. It's really quite simple. I've got some copies here, but the idea here was to put together that RFP, and of course, as an RFP goes, it's less detailed in scope than an RFQ would be, or the proposal that we received, but it does identify the scope. It's basically a similar scope to what the proposal was, because all of them are that way. But going through an RFP process does allow for other firms to come in and tell you what they do, how they do it, and they can be creative in the approach they take. So we may find that, you know, we've used a very good, great group of people historically, whether it was when they were Birchler, Clear Zoning, or Giffords Webster. I know the folks that you use, and they're darn good planners. So it's not as if, you know, we've got to fix a bunch of problems that have been created. We have very good, solid foundation from which to lead. But this does still give us the opportunity to take a look around what's out there, what other consultants are out there, and what are they doing? Are they doing anything different with the visioning sessions or the, you know, mapping or whatever other work they might do? Is there something new about, you know, how they're approaching master planning that, you know, the firm we've been using isn't? Or, you know, you get to compare apples and apples. You get firms going to come in at, you know, this much, and they're the same kind of work. You wonder why. So we have a process that we would be going through, and we would be looking for firms that are going to do what we want. What I say to that is that tonight we're looking for feedback from this group, of course, but also I want to be clear that when we do an RFP, that RFP, when we get those proposals and we decide whom we want to bring in, we do have the opportunity at that time to negotiate, to begin the process of negotiating and fine-tuning the content and the price. And I want to spend a little bit of time about some of that here in a moment. But what we would do when we send it out is we'd send it out to BidNet, and some of you probably heard of these organizations, Mitten, the Michigan Planning Magazine, of course, and then put it on our Township webpage. That's the place where any of the consultants who work, at least in the state of Michigan for sure, are going to be looking at these. They're going to find them, and they're going to probably bid. I mean, Blanc Township's likely going to solicit a good number of bids. So that's how we would distribute the RFP. And this issue came up at the last meeting. I didn't feel great about the response, but I wasn't prepared necessarily, but I wanted to reiterate a couple of things. What can we do in-house? What are we going to do? Well, we're going to manage the project, of course. We're going to coordinate the meetings. We're going to do the notifications and identify and help coordinate the utilization of the facilities. We'll develop focus areas, and we'll work on those things that we would typically do. And that gives you an idea of those things we would do. But what else can we do? And this is a part that I didn't get into, and I'd like you to know and understand the things we can do. And I'd like to start by saying, I suspect you probably all know that, you know, there are limitations to the expertise that we have here in this organization across the board, whether it's planning or word processing or, you know, whatever else it might be, word publishing, you know, a number of things. We don't always have, you know, we don't have the highest level of expertise in all of these areas, so we have to go out and get help. But the things that we can do, and I think they're important, and you asked this question and I owe you an answer, and what I want to do is let you know tonight the things that we really can do that mean a lot associated with the master plan. We can do all the data collection, because that's simply a matter of getting with the feds, the state, and local areas, the police, fire, everybody, collecting the data. All the data that's going to be gotten from any consultant is the same data that we could get. And we can analyze that data, and we can report on that data. So we can do that work that they're going to charge us a certain amount for. Now, they may not have it broken down, but we can collect and do that data. We can also illustrate that data. We can graphically illustrate it. We can map it out. We can do all of that. We have the capacity, the know-how. As a matter of fact, I want to be clear that, and have you know that the maps that you see in our master plan now, that might have someone else's logo on it, are maps that we've prepared. Our technology has grown considerably since, you know, years ago. We've got expertise now that we just didn't have. We've got software and hardware now that we didn't have, that we can do things with that we just frankly weren't able to. So we can do those things that we wouldn't have done if we'd have done an RFP 10 years ago, because we just didn't have that in-house capability. But with the technology and with the availability of this information and data right off the internet, which is exactly where everybody's going to get it, we can do that. And so we'll pull that in. We'll create the charts and we'll create the graphs, and we're just not going to let them charge us for it, because that's what would typically happen is they'd go, hey, we're going to need these graphs. Can you guys give us information on your traffic or your infrastructure, your utilities, your water lines, your electric, all of that, you know, sewer. They're going to have us give them all those maps, and then they're going to say, here's the maps from 2013, here's the maps from 2019, and then they're going to do the analysis, and then they're going to report and tell you there was a 20% increase. I mean, I'm simplifying it. But I'm hopefully making the point that we can do that, and the information will be exactly the same. But we'll work with them to make sure their job would be to take that data and then utilize it for their analysis of the master plan, the visioning of the concepts.
The other part of data collection is also public input. That's an important piece of it.
Yeah, there's a couple of big areas there. That's kind of a side specialty issue. Now, you're right, that is data. I don't look at it the same as that kind of data, but you're right, it is. It's exactly the same thing. Yes, sir, please.
Do we have the personnel in staff in-house at the present time to carry this workload?
This?
Yes, or do
This
we
part?
Or are we going to have to add people to the township payroll to do this work?
No. What I'm presenting here tonight is the idea here would be to utilize a consultant to prepare a considerable portion of the master plan. But there are components of it, elements, if you will, sections that we can do. And this is just an example of the things that we can do. And we have people in-house right now today who can do this work, who have time to do this work, who are excited about doing this work, actually, who kind of chomping at the bit to have an opportunity to be a part of this. So this is, turning into a pretty good team effort, and folks in-house are excited. We've got great people who do this. You guys, most of you met Robbie one way or another. He's of course a part of it, but Matt Kimmer, if you don't know him, you get to know him. He's a great guy, true genius when it comes to GIS. So we have this, and he's as good as anybody out there. Any professional firm we would hire, he's got the same qualifications. And we've got all the same data. So we're going to do this. So that's that part. Those are the things that we can do. And then, this gets into the survey part and stuff a little bit, but we can also identify, well, what about the specific studies and survey areas that we want? Well, that's part of that kickoff usually that the planner would come in and find out, are there any particular areas of absolute specific interest that we, the commission and staff, know about that we just have to concentrate on, pay attention to. Some things that come to my mind, I hear things about the north side all the time. I'm not recognizing that as a potential scope of this project because that's a big undertaking, but reference to it, recognition of it as an area that needs to be helped and worked on, of course, that'll be a component of it. Specifics won't be a part of this. So you can do that kind of thing. And other projects that might be similar or overlap. Are there other things that might be going on? One thing that I would mention is, I know that, Al's got a couple of things that he's mentioned wanting to look at and consider doing. He's looking at a budget. We talked about that at the last meeting as well, and I'm looking at that, and there's a couple of things there that he's thinking about that might very well overlap with some of this. So some of the information that Al might be wanting to get, the data that we talked about a little bit at the last meeting, might be some of that same data. So, Val's out there, and I don't mean to single him out, it just happens to be a project that he's working on, but if that goes through and we're actually going to be working on that, we may be able to leverage those two efforts and or at least save money on them by taking the results, if you will, of one and utilizing it as part of the other. So not to make it would have to be the right apples to apples information, but we can do that. So there are opportunities out there, options available. And I think we have the responsibility, of course, of looking at those things. We have to. I know I have to. I'm tasked with finding ways to save money, to reduce costs, and make sure that we're being as efficient as possible. So when these things come to my attention, I'm taking a look at them going, there is a possibility we might be able to fool some of this. Let's see. And then, as we were talking about, and you just mentioned, Dan, the whole idea of the comprehensive public survey, that the idea of the surveying and visioning and getting that information is critical. And there's several ways that we could do this. One is, as I'm mentioning here, is a comprehensive public survey. For those of you who've been through the master planning process, you know that we have workshops and we hold charrettes and we do wonderful things where we invite people in and ask them to stick things on the walls, and we pull that data down and we tabulate it and we tell you what happened that night. And it's legitimate, appropriate, great information to have, and we're going to do that. But there's also opportunities to do more comprehensive surveying. That idea, and the thing that keeps coming to my mind, and I'm not going to ever get rid of it, is this whole idea of the premier community. And my thinking is, well, why don't we give some thought to surveying our entire community and asking the entire community, what do you think it takes to be a premier community? What do you like to see? What do you want to do? How do you, I mean, a comprehensive survey for our community that we can do that has much further reaching ramifications and benefit than just what we're doing with our master plan, but it can and should be part of the data that's utilized in our master plan to reflect the interests of the community. You couple that with the information and responses that we get from the visioning sessions and workshops, I think we have a much more comprehensive, much more effective master planning document that does a better job of reflecting public input. And I don't know how else we'll do it, you guys. If we'd have to hold so many charrettes, and you all know how, all those of you who've attended these, you know that what happens a lot of times is the same people come to the next one and the next one. So you're not getting that breadth of information. And I'll tell you from a consulting standpoint, you're happy if you get 20 people at a meeting, 10 even sometimes, because you do 10 of these, and at the end of the report, you'd get to tell everybody you had 100 people show up or whatever, and it sounds a lot more impressive than 10. But that's what the end results are. So I just want it to be legitimate. I want it to be substantial, and I want it to be accurate. And I think this is a good way to do that. There are plenty of firms out there, and I believe these firms who would do some of this planning work for us all have, not all of them, but a number of them have the ability to do these kinds of surveys as well. I just so happen to been doing a little bit of work on the side, following up on some of the discussions and things we've had with regards to the premier community, and I'm looking at doing a comprehensive community-wide survey. That hasn't really gone anywhere, but now that we're talking about this, I ought to bring it up and bring it into the mix. Yes, sir, please.
Where do you see us as planning commissioners enabling and helping you?
Well, that is a good question. We'll need folks at every one of the charrettes, of course. We'll need planning commissioners to be a part of the kickoff, providing your information early and often, if necessary, with regards to, your visions. What is it that the commissions think? We're going to need the same things from the board. But we will identify, I haven't identified a role for anybody in particular yet, but what we'll do is we'll identify the responsibilities and then identify the roles, the things that we're going to need to do. My approach is typically to say, here's the things we need help with. What would you like to do? Give you a chance to get in early on the things you maybe want to do, and then I'll have to kind of come around backwards to the folks who don't respond and say, well, these are the things that we have left over. We're going to need help from you on this. But I don't expect that it's going to be a lot. You won't be writing, of course, but we would expect that, you'll participate in all of these, maybe conduct your own workshop or whatever with your neighborhood or your neighbors. We've talked about that.
Well, I think, I'm going to ask my colleagues, I think Ms. Coulter, myself, Mr. Johnson, and Mr. Gellings were certainly involved 5 years ago when we went through this process, and there was a lot of things that we did here on several occasions to get the community in and get input from them.
Yeah.
I'm hoping you guys remember as I do it. I thought it was quite beneficial. Ms. Coulter, you were part of that as well, were you not?
Yeah. I wanted to chime in. I like the idea of a comprehensive survey. I mean, I'm not sure, when you say comprehensive survey, do you mean like sending out a survey questionnaire to every household in the township? That might be expensive. Could you do it? I know I questioned at one point, could we do a random survey, get a random sample if we can't, kind of realistically survey everybody in the township or every household in the township. But that, my concern over these, the workshops and the charrettes is what you expressed, that you only get a very small group of people, and they tend to be either the same people or somebody that's got a particular issue at that time that they want to promote. I mean, we've got, 37,000 people in the township, so even if you have 100, that's a very small percentage of, and it might not be reflective of all of the general feeling in the township.
Well, I've learned a little bit about surveys doing the research, and what I did find is that, it would be a survey that would be, mailed out, it could be emailed out, it can be phoned out. There's a lot of different ways that they approach it. And then the way that they allow people to respond is where they provide a lot more flexibility because they want the responses. So what they do is, if the only way to get it to people is to mail it, which is typically the best way, it's hard to find everybody's email, right? Is to mail it, and then you request that people respond, and you give them options of how they can respond, and that just makes it easier. Used to be you had to fill it out and return an envelope, you know, and that didn't happen too well. But now the technology allows it to be a little easier. And I did look at firms, and they have there's certain approaches and procedures that they use, and they do it based on the percentage of responses, and it gets them a certain percentage of accuracy. And I've looked at that, and I'm going, goodness, man, they get 95% accuracy on something like that. So, you know, if that's the case, I mean, we'd all want to learn and understand what we're going to get, you know, before we just say, sure, let's go ahead and do it. But what I've learned from my research so far is it's pretty impressive that they're able to get that kind of accuracy out of a survey.
Sam,
You mentioned, I think, I'm remembering along the same lines what Ms. Coulter is, that I think in the past it was deemed it was very expensive, that the budget wasn't there to do a mass mailing to everyone. That's
Well, that's what's nice about Al getting involved a little bit with his ideas, is because he's got some money identified for certain things, and surveying and looking up information is kind of part of that. So I don't know how and what we would do to take advantage of that, or how those would cross, but there might be a great opportunity. And frankly, I'd like to get the survey done as soon as possible. We could do that well in advance of starting the master plan. So, you know, that could be a component, a resource, but it doesn't necessarily have to be something that we say this consultant we want is the one that's going to do it. But it's an idea, and I think it's a fresh idea, because when I was a consultant, were always bummed out by the attendance. And when we had what we thought was a great night, I never felt good about that being very reflective of what the community is really looking for. We go through the exercise, we go through the process, but darn it, it is tough. That's one of the hardest parts. So, you know, that's how we pursue. So, that's my presentation on this. What I'd be looking for is feedback on the RFP, thoughts you have about this discussion, and just anything.
Mr. Brown, you had a question?
Yeah, actually, to Mr. Mansour, I know we wouldn't be here talking about this tonight if the Board of Trustees weren't behind this. My question is, how active do you envision the Board of Trustees being? And I realize this is a planning commission project here, the master plan. It's not the trustees. But how much involvement would you expect to see from the trustees, if any at all?
So we have had a little bit of discussion about that. And it is the responsibility, the board views its responsibility of the Planning Commission to undertake this master plan development, no question about that. It is, I think, incumbent upon the Planning Commission, though, to provide some kind of regular update or review with the township. And ultimately, the township board, you know, has to sign on to this thing. So there will probably be some input along the way. I think everyone in the township board, I can't speak for everyone specifically, but we all understand that getting input in earlier rather than later is a much more productive way to do things. So to the extent that we could kind of be exposed to what's going on early in the process and then at certain periodic points, I think that's the right approach to that. So, and we're on board, we're signing up for the budget, and I would like to make two more comments about this. First off, let me demystify some of Director Lloyd's comments about initiatives. So you're aware, I guess, if you've been kind of following the Township Board's, especially fourth meeting agendas, that we signed up to participate in about a dozen different initiatives as a board, things like business attractiveness and retail, which is one of mine, planning and zoning, which is one of mine, streets and roads, which isn't one of mine. And anyway, there's a whole list of them. And the idea is that some of those should dovetail, some of the activities should dovetail in with the master plan, which is another good reason to kind of keep things connected. So for the two that I am working on, I've presented a proposal for a budget. For the business attractiveness and retail, part of that is to go to creating some renderings of some commercial space that we could use in meetings with business owners to kind of give them an idea of what we're thinking about in terms of what a development would look like and how they could slot it in, just to help visualize what's going on. So that's one area. Another one, planning and zoning, we're reserving money to go out and do a benchmark, because we want to be sure that we're, if we want to be a premier community, we ought to know what their successful communities are doing in terms of how their planning zoning ordinances are compared to ours. So those would be a couple things that will dovetail, nicely in with this. So,
Good.
Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, kind of to follow up with that, I went to the planning and zoning conference that was in Grand
Yeah.
Rapids.
Awesome.
Whatever it was, it's been a whirlwind since then, so, I think I'm back here now. But there were a few things that came up in that I felt were really appropriate for where we're at right now. One of the big ones, and it came out of Art Prize, believe it or not, Grand Rapids' Art Prize, which is now grown to the point where they started out a little over 10 years ago, and it was a all-volunteer, let's get together and have an art fair kind of thing. Now they have over 1,500 exhibiting artists from all over the world, $500,000 in juried prizes. They have another $500,000 that are in grants, and this is the part that's really growing. It's in grants and future development. And this has all been put together with benefactors, corporations, and the community. One really interesting thing that they've done is to grow this, and they actually formed a 501c3 corporation to take this over, and now they have a director, staff members, and that was done in 2009 or 10. So now they have a revenue generating tool that has been put back out to the community. It's not a tax, it's I don't know how to best phrase it. I've requested the actual language of the ordinance. It is an ordinance, it's like a revenue sharing ordinance, and it's a development ordinance. So people that are coming into Grand Rapids area as part of their business, as part of their philanthropic efforts, etc., are mandated up to $25,000 to contribute or to host a function, that type of thing. And it's kind of like, some way, shape, or form, it's kind of like our tree ordinance, where it's got this kind of weird thing, and all of a sudden there's money developing in a pool somewhere. But they did it with art, and in its law, it's been, very successful. And there was a lot of pushback at first, but the companies, the benefactors, and everybody that's got involved in it now see the, they brought in over 1 million people over this art prize this year into the city of Grand Rapids.
This year?
Yes, this year. And, if everybody bought one hot dog and a fry at $5, that's a lot of economic development.
Sure.
Okay? And so that's kind of what they're looking at. So I've requested that ordinance that they put together. I had an opportunity to talk to the guy for about an hour and a half, and you're getting a 5-minute rendition of it. But I've requested that from him. He says he's going to, send it over to us so that we can pass it on. Another thing that they were talking about was this whole creative funding process, because we're all looking for money, and nobody's ever got enough money. And so one of the things they were talking about was creative funding, and that's looking outside the box in every direction you can look, whether it was reducing parking fees or increasing parking fees. in the downtown district. They're talking about economic development, and they actually have a team now from the top corporations that are there, that are all involved in an economic development commission. And it's all been done, I don't want to say privately, but it's because it's public, but everybody's buying in, and they're creating competition among the corporations that are there to outdo each other. And they're having some great success with that, and it's all coming back into economic development and that. And the other big one is, I am not aware of anybody that we have on staff that is a tremendously successful grant administrator. I think for the past 5 or more years, that's an area where we really needed to expand our expertise and to take advantage of everything that's out there. They have a full staff, and they're putting out it's everything you can imagine. Whether it's having to do with Meyer Gardens, which is now the second largest commercial public tourist attraction in the state of Michigan. Meyer Gardens. And so one of the things that I would say in the master planning process is part of the definition, who do we want to be? Because 15 years ago, Grand Rapids wasn't the art mecca of Michigan. And now they're the mecca, and cities like Ann Arbor and everybody else are going to them to see what they're doing. So it's not like it can't be done. We just have to figure out what it is we want to do and then allocate those resources.
Commissioner Johnson? So that is an excellent point. I'm glad to have that from especially the last one, from an independent source. But one of the things that we've been kicking around, not so much in the meetings, but a couple of us, is this whole concept of branding. And that is, I think, what you're talking about. And it's one thing that I think if we could, as a community, get our heads wrapped around, we could tie in and leverage so many things to it that we could, basically be the center for something. I don't know what that is, right. but we could really focus our energies on that and really build something, really impressive here. So I will take that back gladly. Take that back to the township and board, and we may try and figure out some way to get some money around that. To see, I'm not in favor of paying a lot of money to someone to come up with some acronym words or something, that doesn't mean anything. But I think that if we can, come to some theme for the community and get everyone to start tying into it, it'd be just awesome. It'd be great. What you could do with it would be almost unlimited, actually.
I agree. When you think of, just throw a few out there that everybody probably knows. What do you think of when you hear Interlochen?
Uses it.
Okay. So, and now it's, our pride, Meadowbrook. Right.
Use it.
Cranbrook.
Yeah.
So people identify different areas with certain, okay, so now let me ask one. Financial. Nothing comes to mind, right? Because people deal with their money in different ways than they deal with their emotions. Most of the stuff that you go to, to be a tourist attraction, like Frankenmuth, for example, everybody thinks of what? Fried chicken. Okay. But it's something.
It sure works, though.
And they've leveraged that to the hill.
That's right.
It's awesome.
They're magnificent at branding. They know what they want to be.
That's right.
And have known it for decades.
And I'm sure that they had, through that time period, people have come in with 40, 50, maybe 1,000 different ideas of how to expand on it and vertical market it, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they are chicken.
But they don't have that as a status quo.
No.
Every time you hear them, they're doing something different and new.
Yep.
But it all ties into the Bavarian
To get
theme
it-
and the rest of that.
Absolutely, it
Yeah.
does, yes.
Yeah. And so I guess that's one of the things that I came back with, and it kind of hit me with a shovel. It's like, we keep talking about being a premier community, but we don't talk about why we would be a destination.
Right.
You're not suggesting, Mr. Johnson, that we have a chicken shack here in Grand Blanc?
Probably not, because I don't think we could compete right now with Franken.
I don't think we could either.
So I don't know that we need, I mean, maybe we want to be the, orange smoothie capital. I mean, that's not my expertise to come up with it. I happened to see it and thought of it. So,
Mr. Lloyd, is that getting you the feedback that you were looking for?
Well, some of it,
Yeah.
but I'm looking for a little bit of direction as well. I put in the proposal, it's just to give you an example, or not the proposal, but the RFP. I did put what I would consider to be a crazy, but just an example of a timeline for you of when, say for example, we were going to start tomorrow. Everybody said, this is perfect, let's go. We would get that out tomorrow, we'd begin that process. We'd provide a question and answer period when we sent out our notice, and then we would provide for a deadline to receive them by, and then we'd perform interviews, and then we would identify who we would choose, bring that to the commission. The commission would probably agree with that committee, I would hope, and then we would present that to the board. And so that does bring us to the committee part of this. That would be one thing that I wouldn't mind coming out of tonight on, would be, I'm going to need some help with the reviews of the RFPs if the commission is willing and interested in wanting to follow that approach, doing RFPs. I've had a couple of thoughts, and I know they're crazy, and I'm sure I'll upset at least one person, but I've thought, it would be good. I think it'd be great to have the person, Al Mansour, from the board. That's a thought that I had, and in particular with some of the other ideas that came about. On the other hand, I recognize from that perspective, nothing personal, just what I would say, I'm not so sure, about the technical review components of that. Al's probably not a master plan expert. We've got a few other people who've got a little more experience, but I'm just making that point. And then the other thought would be to have Dan. You've done it before. You know the master plan. You're the chairperson.
You were taking volunteers.
I would, but I was going to give my recommendation simply because I thought, and then I was hoping maybe Ed would go, yeah, that sounds great. But I was just wanted to give my perspective. I'm a thinking human being, and I don't take this stuff personal, but I do realize what it takes when we sit down and do the review of these, and the different perspectives that I think would come into play from this idea, I think would be helpful from an analysis and recommendation standpoint. That's where I was.
I'm kind of curious, out of the new members of the Planning Commission, what do you think about what Mr. Lloyd has suggested?
I'm all for it.
Well, I like the idea of RFP, but earlier on, you did a great job of identifying and informing us of all the things that the township staff could do. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure that it's clear in the RFP
Right.
to the people making the proposal
That's a great point.
that the things, so that they can include that in their plans.
Right, you're right, and there's going to need to be a determination on how that gets done, because your point is a good one. My perspective on that, having been a person who's received requests for proposal and then putting them together, as well as being in this position numerous times as well, is that my concern would be that as we would approach this and we would identify those things that we would do, that we would take on, that eliminates that from a negotiating standpoint, at least considerably limits that. And I would typically want to hold that as a negotiation after we've received the proposals. Our ability to do these things, we would like you to give consideration to reducing your fees associated with that, submit a revised proposal. We would take their proposal all in, because if we carve stuff out, we may find that somebody can come in and do our full project for us, and they're giving us a great scope of work, and it includes all that stuff. Why would we wouldn't need to do some of those things necessarily. And the other reason for that, from my perspective, is if you identify, your project, and you identify the things that you're going to do and you don't need them to do, and that proposer is taking a look at that. Concern I would have is that somebody might go, you know what, we need to get 50,000 for this no matter what. So instead of it being 10,000 for 5 items, now it's 12.5 for 4. You know, so they're going to adjust their price and make their money in another area. And we're never going to know that if we identify the fact that we're going to do that work. Now that's just my own perspective on things, and one of the reasons I would say you wouldn't necessarily want to put that in there. However, you may. And then the other approach to that would be, and it typically happens where when you have the applicant or the proposer identify their proposal, you ask them to line item those things, and you indicate that the township would have the right to, you know, modify those items. So we could incorporate a provision in the review of that would allow us to take that out. If they list each of the elements, the things they're going to perform, we can carve that part out potentially.
It just seems like, because we have a pretty short timeline, that it might make the negotiations easier and make the proposals more concise and appropriate.
Yeah.
Because I think we're probably looking for, certainly we have to keep the budget and dollars in mind, but I think the quality of the proposals might be reflected in how a different company perceives what we really want. So they might put more dollars in when they think that they have to do the more, let's say, menial tasks or the less professional tasks.
Right.
Does it make sense to include maybe a statement in the RFP along the lines that the planning commission, you know, plans on taking an active role in the development of the final plan, and ask them to identify tasks that they think that we could participate in? Or I see what Mr. Yancho is saying is they may be thinking $100,000 plan, and it would take a lot of carving to get down to what.
Yeah.
I think it's a good idea.
Another suggestion to kind of throw out there is, it might be interesting to ask each of and anybody that's going to submit a proposal, to provide us with an example of a master plan that they did for another municipality and one that's kind of equivalent to us in terms of size, maybe,
Sure.
and whatever, other kinds of characteristics, so we can look at it, get an idea of.
Like a recent
And
one, of
work they
course.
do. Yeah, a recent one.
Yep, great. Sure, actually, it is in there for the proposers to reference those things that they've done, but it's not identified to provide a copy or give us a link or something, so
Yeah.
we could ask for that.
But I think we should
Yeah.
ask for it and ask them
Yep.
to, provide one that they think is,
Right.
their best work and kind of most relevant to our.
We do ask for
community.
samples. The RFP does request samples.
Dr. Lloyd, just not particularly about the RFP, but about the surveying options that we have in general. Something like this was conducted for the technology part, was it not?
Mm-hmm.
Was it, and was that email, and what were the results? How successful was that? I remember seeing the report, but I wasn't sure how much data they had actually collected and how efficient it was and all that.
I don't know, but you're right, it was done.
I remember receiving an email at one point.
When you raised that, you made me realize and think, the County Planning Commission just recently did major data analysis, so all of that information is very new and very much available, which is where everybody would probably be going to get it. So, when we start looking at this, our timing is pretty good. I mean, and discovering that we have the kind of resources we have in-house, that's great, and it's exciting to have the kind of interest that there is in having folks get involved. So, they're not running away from the work, they're kind of running at it, and it's pretty cool to see. That's because they don't know what they're getting into.
They'll find out soon.
Well, look, it seems like we have, if you don't mind, I'll try to summarize a little bit, if you feel like we've had enough discussion. It seems to me that we've got a couple of pieces of this RFP to maybe button down. And I don't know if that's where this commission feels. my sense is that we need to think of some ways of incorporating some language in this, as you were suggesting, Dan, with regards to things that they might be able to do to, you know, reference the planning commission's involvement, identify those things that we would, could, or that they would expect that we would be doing too. And then also, you know, we've got some of this other work, and the idea of how are we going to, you know, what kind of language do we need to incorporate into this RFP to ensure that the proposers are aware of the fact that we're looking at doing some of this work. You know, maybe without explaining exactly what it is, but Al made a comment when he and I were talking about making sure that they line item out all of their work, and then, you know, we could potentially pull those pieces out, and we would just want to make sure that those proposers knew that we were going to reserve the right to identify those things that we felt that we might be able to do, and then we would want to renegotiate that. I don't know exactly how that gets said in the RFP, but that's the gist of what I'm getting, and I'm only summarizing that to make sure that
And I think, in my opinion, that should be left up to you. We give you the input of what we think should be there. You take care of it, because we don't want to wait for another month to get something going.
Okay.
We need to, in my opinion.
Okay.
I think you're on the right track with the, you know, the board reserves the right to, you know, step in on certain aspects, and, you know, we encourage the proposer to, you know, outline certain things that we may be able to participate in.
But then what we'll do is we'll ask them to be a little more specific with how they break out their tasks, let's say, that way to give us the ability to identify those more, because, you know, if you look at tasks sometimes, they kind of blend a few things together, and pulling that piece out, although it says 10,000, let's say, they're going to say, well, no, that's only 4,600 of that 10,000. The rest of it is this stuff. So, you know, we need to be thoughtful about that. And knowing that, it might be helpful. But I believe that I have a good understanding. And I do want to just make sure that the entire commission feels pretty good. Now, I put on here that, you know, I'd like to get started, you know, pretty much immediately. It's going to take me a minute to make, you know, those adjustments. But for the most part, the rest of the RFP is the same. I will look at this schedule and try to make all of that work. That is a very, very tight schedule. That was intended to be, as an example. We don't have a time crunch. There's no law that says you got to do this today or tomorrow. But I wouldn't want to wait to send this out much more than a week past tonight. You know, if what I'm hearing from you is, yep, let's go. If that's the case, then that's the approach that I'd be taking.
Answer?
So I think well, I'm not sure you could call it a law, but I do believe that there's a 5-year timeline that we're required as a township to redo our plan. So we don't really have all the time in the world, but we, you know, but we do have time. And I, just to follow on to Commissioner Yancho's comment, I think it will be interesting for us as we receive these back to see the variation in the cost and the proposal that people make, because obviously the more open the proposal is, the more license people are going to take, and so I guess we'll see what happens.
So in answer to your question, yes, I'd be willing to participate in the
Thank you.
selection process.
Sure, and I would say that what we're just talking about here is just the selection process. The board, the rest of the planning commission needs to be, you know, integrally involved in all the pieces of it.
Yeah.
And I guess, Director Lloyd, if you were to publish the time of the interviews, I'll call them, or reviews, to the rest of the planning commission, I mean, if there was someone who was available and had interest, I mean, I certainly would, you know, if they were available to participate.
Well, that's fine. I'll tell you the approach that I would need to take, and I'm sure you'll all, we have to be very, very consistent with the manner and the way and the questions we ask each group.
It's a good point. It's a good point.
So that's just a thing,
Yep.
you know, and when we ask a side question or whatever, and they're going to come up, we want to be thoughtful about making sure that we give the next person that opportunity if it's relevant. But we do have to be very careful about that, and it is regimented. That approach, it needs to be regimented. What I'll do for the reviewers, you'll have a review sheet that'll identify the things and the ratings and how you do it. I'll put all that together for you, and then we'll develop a series of questions for the interviews, and then we'll have a review sheet for the raw review of the RFPs, and then we'll have a rating sheet, and then we'll have a review sheet and a rating sheet for the interviews. So all of that will be done, and we'll use a very consistent approach.
Prior to that, you've got a time frame in here for them to ask questions.
Oh, yeah.
Publish answers. I presume those answers, if they apply to everyone, they would go out to everyone.
Yep, and we would put them on, we would post them, yep.
Okay.
Yep. Question and answer period.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, to Mr. Lloyd. So our next planning commission meeting is November 1st. One of my things that I'd like to see is something happening that we're getting new information or talking about things at every single meeting in the future, including November 1st, if there's anything been accomplished.
Oh, sure.
Same thing for December as well. Typically, we don't.
You want a standing item on the agenda that
Yes.
says master plan?
Yes.
You got it.
Because I think we want to make sure that
Good point.
we're actively engaged.
Make sure that gets in the minutes.
Every meeting.
Okay. That's great. I couldn't agree more. Very good idea. Keeps it on all of our agendas.
Good.
Okay.
I like where we're headed.
Thank you. I appreciate the support and the interest. Comments are great. Can't wait. It's exciting.
This takes us to our next item on our agenda, which would be committee reports. Mr. Mansour?
I know I just was polling the township board, and again, the highest priority thing on the list for the planning commissions to, get the master plan kicked off and rolling. So that's all I have. Thanks.
Mr. Lloyd, did you have anything else for planning and zoning?
Yeah, I should point out, we talked a little bit about the work program last time. I appreciate the feedback. I do want to make a couple of points, and they were in here. We've got a couple of things that we really ought to get going on from a zoning ordinance standpoint. We just got a couple of things that are frankly a bit problematic that I'd like to begin to look at. And I don't think we need to open up this discussion for the entire commission. What I'd like is to get a commission member or two to help me to focus on a couple of these things, and we could do a couple of them even, tandem. But I got things like signs. We do need to deal with some of that. We've got special events that happen in this town, and we have no way of managing them. Farm animals, we got an ordinance that either is or isn't great. It doesn't, or it does match the Right to Farm Act. There's a lot of confusion there. Solar energy, we never finished that discussion, I don't think, unless the commission felt like you did. Wind energy systems, what about ordinances for that? We should give some thought to that. Those things are out there. Medical marijuana, it's out there again. You got another report. If we're going to maintain the same position, that's probably more of a board policy kind of an issue at the end of the day, but the planning commission can and ought to be weighing in on that. Administrative approvals, what about those things that come through and we require them to go back through the site plan review or the planning commission or whatever? And what about giving some administrative authority for, a site plan amendment that might come in instead of, maybe we create a percentage, if it's no more than 10% or X square feet over the existing building, doesn't change the exterior elevation or something, and we have some provisions in there now that allow for it, but we might want to look at expanding that. That's what I'm getting at. Because we run into complications there. People go, never mind. And that's a little frustrating when you're at the counter and somebody's, letting that influence them. So I look at that, we need to take these things out of the way.
Chairman Gillens, yeah. So, Director Lloyd, I think, has provided us with a list of these. Would you consider having the Planning Commission kind of force rank these things as a basis? Because there's quite a list here that, will diffuse energy if we try to do all of them, but maybe if we prioritize a few of them, we could make some progress and get some.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I want one or two of them to get started. We can get going. We could do them tandem, however, and we could take a good shot at them. But there's some perspective that would need to be understood, and there's things that we do at I'm realizing so much of what we do here that you do policy and ordinance wise, and establishing them. It's all great, but then what happens is the rubber hits the road, and enforcement staff and others have to implement that, and there are complications and problems with that. And the nice thing about our circumstance now is that I'm running code enforcement as well, so the feedback that I'm getting from folks on the efforts to do enforcement out there, we're able to identify those areas of the ordinance that are problematic. And so I want to work with this commission and address those things. I mean, I can take those on and do them myself, but for me, and I'm just asking for help, I would be looking for someone to help and to spend some time, bouncing ideas and feedback off. I mean, I've got great peers here that work with me, but I'd really appreciate getting somebody from this commission that could help carry these things forward. And so,
Okay, you're looking for a volunteer?
I am. Are you looking to volunteer? Beautiful. I was looking right after too, so
Suspected you were
thank you.
kind of aiming something in my
Thank you.
direction, but no,
Then how
Sort of.
about if we get together, Dolores and I get together, and we spend some time, and we'll do this list, and we'll give this commission maybe a shot at this more larger list and prioritize it. But I think we've got a couple of things, and let's give Dolores and I a chance to have a meeting or two, and we'll report back out to you. And I think that might help define it. And Al, we wouldn't be looking at trying to take on all of these at once, spinning ourselves out too lean. That might be more than we can handle. But over the course of the year, we should be able to adopt an ordinance or two and, get these things done. I write them all the time, so I think we should be able to do good. We can get an outline together, we can get issues identified, and then we can give you an idea, bring it to you, and then flush it out with this group, and then go put a final product together and bring it back. That's the way I see it. I hope you guys.
We move along, you'll be looking for, if I understand correctly, some volunteers for particular items, once you help prioritize what they are, and they will work with you, and then
Yeah, we'll get
come
started.
back to the planning commission, here's where we're at, what do you guys think?
And if somebody has a particular interest in an area that we're going to engage in, like trees, for example, we would probably want some folks with real expertise to help us understand that better. Sure. You got it.
or if it's design standards or something like that, then we might want to,
Yep.
pick somebody else's brain on that.
Sure.
Commission.
Great. Man, I want you to know how this assistance that I'm getting here is great. It's going to matter in my ability to do things for this commission. So thank you for that support. I don't. Good. Thank you.
Next item, which has more than a bullet point, actually has a letter on the agenda, is zoning board of appeals.
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. The zoning board of appeals met on September 18th last month, and we had technically we had four new business items. One was withdrawn prior to our meeting. But the first one we considered was ZBA case 18-2074. It's a variance for a setback for a swimming pool. And this was by Amber Clark at 1441 East Reed Road. If you kind of figure where that's at, it's just west of the middle school. And when one of the assessors had been out in the area looking at properties, they discovered that there was a pool in place and found that it had been there a couple of years. And of course, it didn't meet the setback requirements, so there were a number of problems. So it came to the zoning board of appeals for a variance. And I got to tell you, it's really, really disheartening sometimes when suppliers of services, whether it's products and or services, don't tell buyers that they're required to go to the local municipality and it's going to require a permit. And this is exactly what happened with this couple. And they got a pool there, it's in place. The seller of the pool, as well as the installer, neither of those two told the purchasers that they needed to have permits. So they were basically in a tight position here, and ultimately, because neighbors on either side spoke in their behalf, certainly lend some credence to the fact that afterwards the members of the zoning board of appeals did approve the variance for this couple, because they were, I know we didn't want to see them have to take their pool out.
It was an in-ground pool?
No, it was an above-ground pool, and they had a mother-in-law that had some significant health issues, and the pool was good for her in the summertime for some health reasons. So anyways, that was approved, 5-0. And then ZBA case 18-2076, it was for a variance with width to depth ratio. And this was over on the corner of Fenton Road and, I think I'm right on this, Cook. I visited the property, and egads, the lady that it was, see, I'm sure I got her name here. Right now I don't see it. Anyways, she made a very nice presentation showing properties that they wanted to combine, and it was probably the most confusing group of properties that they wanted to combine, but it really did make sense because a lot of them didn't meet various width to depth ratios. And again, ultimately, the board agreed to the variance and allowed them to combine these properties. Anything that you can remember on that, Mr. Laurie?
There were three. It ultimately resulted in the splitting of a parcel into three.
Yeah. But they were just all kinds of weird shapes.
Very oddly configured and just
and they had been like
assembled
that
over
for
years.
30, 40 years
Yeah.
or longer.
Yeah.
So it wasn't something brand new. And I think, if I recall what the petitioner said, that with the approval of this, there was a developer that had some interest in building some new single-family homes there. Do you recall that?
That's why they were dividing it.
I think that was the case. So anyways, that was approved 5-0 as well. Then lastly, ZBA case 18-2077 was a variance for an accessory building, and this was over on 1065 Jefferson Boulevard, which is over off of Fenton Road, from east of Fenton Road. And the applicant was asking to be able to put up a second outbuilding on the property. Yeah, I would misbook myself on that one. And that was ultimately approved 4-1 with one dissenting vote. That's it.
Any other questions for Mr. Brown? Next item on our agenda, site plan review. We did not see any site plans in the last month. That would take us on to a motion for adjournment.
Cameron, can I just make an